All right, so here's the deal. The team's in a really interesting spot right now. There's a clear gap that just opened up, and how they decide to fix it could seriously change how this defense looks next season. They've got options on the table, some safer, some a bit more risky. But either way, this is one of those moves that could quietly make a huge difference if they get it right. But first, be sure to click the like button and comment, "Go Seahawks," if you're rooting for this team all the way. The Seattle Seahawks are quietly staring at an opportunity that could reshape the identity of their defense heading into the next phase of the Mike Macdonald era. And it revolves around a position group that suddenly has more questions than answers after the departure of Boy Mayfair. This isn't just about replacing snaps or filling a rotational gap. It's about redefining how this defense attacks quarterbacks while still holding firm against the run, something that Macdonald has made very clear is non-negotiable in his system. Mayfair's exit leaves behind a role that, while not elite in production, was still meaningful within the defensive rotation. Over the last 2 seasons, he operated as a secondary edge presence, someone who wasn't dominant against the run, but consistently brought energy and pressure off the edge. He wasn't afraid to go after the quarterback, and in a system that values pressure in waves, that matters. But the reality is that he didn't fully align with what Macdonald wants from his defensive ends. The scheme demands versatility, players who can set the edge, defend the run, and still generate pressure. Mayfield leaned more toward being a pure pass rusher, and that mismatch ultimately opened the door for Seattle to look elsewhere. Now the big question becomes, how do the Seahawks replace that production while also improving the overall balance of the defensive front? There are 2 clear paths: develop a young player through the draft, or bring in a veteran who already understands how to operate within a complex defensive system. And based on the current landscape, the stronger possibility appears to be a veteran addition, someone who can step in immediately and execute without a long developmental curve. One name that stands out, even if it hasn't been widely connected to Seattle yet, is Kyle Van Noy. This is where things get interesting, because this isn't just about talent, it's about familiarity and fit. Van Noy has already played under Mike Macdonald, and not just participated, he thrived. During his time in that system, he experienced a resurgence, putting together a highly productive season that reminded everyone he could still be a disruptive force. Just 1 year removed from being a double-digit sack player and posting 9 sacks in Macdonald's defense, there's a clear blueprint for how he can be utilized effectively. Even in what was considered a less impressive 2025 season, the context matters. The defensive environment around him wasn't ideal, and that can significantly impact edge production. But the key takeaway is that when placed in the right scheme, Van Noy has already shown he can deliver. That's exactly what makes this potential move so logical. Macdonald knows how to deploy him, understands his strengths, and can put him in situations where he doesn't have to carry a full workload, but can still be highly efficient. And that's another critical layer here: usage. The Seahawks don't need Van Noy to be a full-time starter logging heavy snaps. With players like DeMarcus Lawrence, Uchenna Nwosu, and Derek Hall already in the rotation, the role would be clear: come in, stay fresh, and attack. Limited snap counts could actually maximize his effectiveness, allowing him to operate at full speed without wearing down over the course of a game. Financially, this move also checks out. At this stage of his career, Van Noy isn't commanding a massive contract. Projections suggest a 1-year deal in the range of $3.5 million, a number that fits comfortably within Seattle's available cap space. That flexibility is important because it allows the front office to remain aggressive if another opportunity arises later in the off-season, or even closer to the trade deadline. You're essentially getting a proven scheme-fit player without compromising future moves. But Van Noy isn't the only veteran option on the table, And arguably, the more intriguing name in terms of upside versus perception is Cam Jordan. At first glance, some might dismiss this idea due to his age and recent statistical decline. But that surface-level evaluation doesn't tell the full story. There are strong indications that his dip in production over the past couple of seasons was influenced more by coaching and usage issues than by a complete drop-off in ability. Jordan brings something that directly aligns with what Macdonald wants: balance. He can rush the passer and defend the run at a high level, something that cannot be overstated in this defensive scheme. While he may no longer be in his prime, the expectation wouldn't be for him to carry the defensive line. Instead, much like the vision for Van Noy, he would be part of a rotation that keeps him fresh and effective. There's also a compelling comparison to be made here. The idea of Jordan stepping into Seattle and having a resurgence similar to what DeMarcus Lawrence provided is not far-fetched. A veteran player, coming off less productive seasons, enters a system that knows how to use him properly, and suddenly he looks revitalized. That's not just wishful thinking, it's a pattern we've already seen. What makes this entire situation so fascinating is how under the radar it feels. These aren't the splashy, headline-grabbing moves that dominate national conversations, but they're exactly the kind of calculated decisions that can elevate a defense from good to legitimately dangerous. And if John Schneider is operating quietly, evaluating these options without drawing attention, it wouldn't be surprising at all if something materializes when least expected. So now it comes down to philosophy. Do the Seahawks prioritize familiarity and scheme fit with someone like Kyle Van Noy? Or do they take a swing on a higher upside veteran like Cam Jordan, who could potentially exceed expectations in the right environment? Or do they go in a completely different direction and invest in youth through the draft? Because one thing is clear: replacing Boy Mafe isn't just about filling a roster spot, it's about making a decision that could define how this defense performs in the upcoming season. What do you think Seahawks fans should do here? Bring in a veteran like Van Noy or Cam Jordan? Or trust the draft to solve this problem? And after this, do you want me to create highly clickable YouTube title ideas for this story? And when you zoom out and really connect all the dots here, what the Seahawks are facing isn't just a roster decision. It's a philosophical test for how this new era under Mike Macdonald is going to operate moving forward. Because everything we're talking about, the potential signing of Kyle Van Noy, the possibility of bringing in Cam Jordan, the decision to move on from Boy Mafe, it all ties back to one central idea. This defense is being rebuilt with intention, not just talent. Macdonald isn't looking to stack names, he's looking to build a machine. A unit where every piece fits, where every player understands their role, and where versatility isn't a bonus, it's a requirement. That's why the Mafe situation matters more than it might seem on the surface. It's not that he wasn't productive enough, it's that he didn't fully align with the blueprint. And if you don't fit the blueprint, no matter how talented you are, you become replaceable. Now imagine what happens if Seattle executes this correctly. You bring in a veteran like Van Noy, someone who already understands the system, who doesn't need time to adjust, who can immediately step into a rotational role and produce efficiently. Then you potentially pair that with a player like Cam Jordan, who, despite the narrative around his recent seasons, still has the tools to be impactful when used properly. Suddenly, you're not just replacing Mafe. You're upgrading the entire structure of your edge rotation. You're talking about a group that includes DeMarcus Lawrence, Uchenna Nwosu, Derek Hall, and then adding experienced, situationally dangerous veterans into that mix. That's depth. That's flexibility. That's the kind of rotation that can keep offenses guessing and quarterbacks uncomfortable for 4 quarters. And here's where it gets even more intriguing. The financial side of all this actually works in Seattle's favor. Neither Van Noy nor Jordan is expected to command a massive contract at this stage of their careers. That means the Seahawks can make one, or even both, of these moves without sacrificing their ability to stay aggressive elsewhere. Whether that's another late free agency addition, a mid-season trade, or even future extensions, the front office keeps its options open. That kind of flexibility is exactly how smart teams stay competitive year after year. They don't overcommit, they don't chase headlines, they identify value and exploit it. And right now, both of these players represent value in different ways. Van Noy offers certainty and familiarity. Cam Jordan offers upside and the potential for a resurgence. But there's also a layer of unpredictability here that Seahawks fans should pay close attention to. The fact that these names haven't been heavily linked to Seattle could mean one of two things. Either the interest isn't there, or, and this is where things get interesting, John Schneider is doing what he often does best, operating quietly, staying patient, and waiting for the right moment to strike. Because think about it, the longer a player like Cam Jordan remains unsigned, the more leverage shifts toward teams like Seattle. The price could drop, the urgency increases, and suddenly, a move that once seemed unlikely becomes not just possible, but strategic. At the same time, there's always the draft looming in the background. And while the current expectation leans toward adding a veteran, it only takes one player falling unexpectedly for that plan to change. If there's an edge rusher that John Schneider believes is too good to pass up, the Seahawks could pivot instantly. That's the balance they have to maintain: short-term needs versus long-term potential. But if we're being honest about where this team is right now, the argument for experience is strong. This defense is still evolving, still learning, still adapting to a relatively new system. Bringing in players who already understand how to operate within that system could accelerate that process in a big way. And that's really what this all comes down to: acceleration. How quickly can this defense become dominant? How quickly can it go from promising to reliable, from solid to feared? Moves like these, calculated, targeted, system-driven, are how you close that gap. So as we wait to see what direction Seattle ultimately takes, just remember this: the biggest moves aren't always the loudest ones. Sometimes it's the under-the-radar decisions, the signings that don't dominate headlines, that end up having the biggest impact when the season kicks off. If the Seahawks get this right, if they find the right combination of veterans to complement their current core, we could be looking at a defensive unit that surprises a lot of people this season, and not just in flashes, but consistently. Now, I want to hear from you. If you had to choose just one, are you going with Kyle Van Noy for the scheme fit, or Cam Jordan for the upside? And do you think the Seahawks are closer to making a move than we realize? Make sure you subscribe to the channel, leave your like on the video, and click the video that's on your screen right now to stay fully updated on everything happening with the Seattle Seahawks, because the latest news and insights you're only going to find right here.